The meeting room smelled like recycled air and old decisions. High Executor Dravos stood at the head of the long table and looked at the star map floating above it. 17 campaigns across 40 years, 17 species brought to heel. He had run the same calculation each time. Find what they love, hold it, negotiate from a position of strength. It had never failed. He pointed one long finger at a small blue dot near the edge of human space. Kepler's Landing, he said. Population 4,200, mostly farmers. One garrison of 12 soldiers, lightly armed. A fuel depot of no military value. His advisors leaned forward. The humans have been blocking our claim to the Aldrin mineral belt for 3 years, he continued. They do this not because they need the minerals, but because they do not want us to have them. We will give them a reason to reconsider. One advisor, younger than the rest, pulled up the human military file. Their response doctrine is proportional. It is written into their laws. They cannot escalate beyond the scope of the original incident without a council vote, which takes weeks. Exactly. Dravos folded his hands. We hold the colony. We hold the people. They negotiate. We release. Everyone goes home. Their population will be upset. Their population is always upset. They will write letters and hold signs and make noise. Their government will manage it. He looked around the table. The humans have been soft for 300 years. They sign treaties. They build hospitals on the planets of people who tried to kill them. They apologize at the negotiating table for things that were not their fault. He almost smiled. They are a civilization that has forgotten what it is. He tapped the blue dot. The population includes a significant number of children. Our analysts classify them as optimal emotional collateral. The humans will not risk them. Nobody in the room flinched at the phrase. That was the first mistake. Kale Morrow was fixing the water reclamation unit on the east side of the colony when the ships came. He was not supposed to be there. His shift had ended 2 hours ago. But the secondary filter had been making a sound it shouldn't make, a low, grinding hum. And it bothered him, the way a loose thread bothers a person who notices loose threads. He couldn't leave it. He had his head inside the access panel when the alarm went off. He pulled his head out, looked up. The sky was wrong. 4 ships, big ones, dropping through the clouds with the kind of weight that said they were not here to trade. He ran, not toward the garrison, toward the main settlement, toward the school, which was between him and the garrison, and where he knew, without having to think about it, that the children would still be because afternoon classes ran until the 4th bell. He ran hard. The ground was dry, and the grain fields were gold and tall on both sides of the path. And it was a beautiful afternoon, the kind that Kepler's Landing had about 60 of per year. And later he would think about that, the beauty of that afternoon specifically, in the way that a person thinks about something they can never get back. He heard the first impact before he cleared the fields. He came out of the grain path, and the school was still standing. For 3 seconds it was still standing. Then it wasn't. He stopped. He stood in the path, with the gold fields behind him, and the smoke in front of him, and he stopped moving completely, which was something Kale Morrow almost never did. He made himself start again. He moved through what had been the center of the settlement, past the community hall, past the med station, past the small market, where old Brennan sold vegetables every 3rd morning, and always gave extra to families with young kids, because he said it was good for his soul. He cataloged. He could not help it. His brain would not stop cataloging. A child's boot on the path outside the community hall. Small, red, one of a pair. He kept moving. The garrison was gone. The 12 soldiers were gone. He found the emergency beacon unit under the collapsed wall of the communications building, dug it out with his hands, and activated it. He did not notice this for a long time. He sat next to the beacon and waited. He looked at the ruins around him, and he took a breath, and he did what his training had taught him to do, which was to make a record. He spoke into the beacon's recorder. He said what he had seen, and when, and in what order. He used no emotional language, because he had no emotional language left. He had only facts, and the order of facts. He spoke for 4 minutes. At the end, he said, "There were children here." Not as an accusation, not as a cry, as a fact that the record needed to contain. Then he sat down and waited for someone to come. The transmission arrived at Central Command on Earth at 0340 hours, local time. The duty officer on shift was a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Park. No relation to the admiral she would one day brief. She was 26 years old and had been doing this job for 14 months and had processed 412 incident reports in that time. She read Cale Morrow's transmission twice. She set it down. She did not call her supervisor for 11 minutes. This was a violation of protocol. She was never disciplined for it. Nobody who read that transmission later could bring themselves to ask her why she waited. When she did call, she read it out loud. Her voice stayed flat. She was trained for that. Her hands, out of frame, were not flat at all. Her supervisor listened, said nothing for a moment. Then, "Get me Admiral Voss." "It's 0340, sir. I know what time it is." Sarah Park put the call through. She stayed at her station. She processed 3 other routine reports while she waited. Her hands had stopped shaking by then. She was good at her job. Admiral Sarah Voss read the transmission, standing at her desk. She did not sit. She read it once, slowly, then set it on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. She was 52 years old. She had a face that did not move much when she was thinking hard. People who did not know her sometimes thought she was cold. People who did know her understood that what they were seeing was not coldness. It was the expression of a person doing very precise math. She picked up the transmission again, read it one more time. She set it down. She pressed the comm. "Get me the Fleet Logistics Commander," she said. "Get me the Shipyard Director. Get me the Defense Council. Do it now, please." The please was habitual. Her voice was very quiet. She looked at the wall again. On it, one photograph. She looked at it for 4 seconds. Then she turned back to her desk. The Galactic Council chamber was built to impress. 60 meters of polished stone floor. Ceilings that curved up into dark vaults. 17 delegation boxes arranged in a wide arc, each one representing a species old enough and powerful enough to have a seat at the table. The room had seen wars end, and treaties signed, and civilizations welcomed into the fold of galactic order. It had never felt small before. It felt small now. The Vrethkai ambassador, a tall figure named Velshara, stood at the central podium and presented the territorial case for the Aldrin mineral belt with smooth confidence. He had done this kind of thing many times. He knew how these meetings went. There would be arguments. There would be counter-arguments. Eventually the humans would agree to a compromise, because humans always agree to compromises. They were civilized that way. He finished his presentation and looked across the arc at the human delegation box. The man sitting there was named Aldrich Chen. He was 60 years old, soft-spoken, with gray at his temples and a calm face that gave nothing away. He had been a diplomat for 35 years. He had the kind of patience that came from having sat in more rooms like this one than he could count. He waited until the chamber was fully quiet. Then he said, "The human government notes the Vrethkai territorial claim and will review it through the standard process." A pause. "We also note that 3 days ago, a Vrethkai military force attacked and destroyed the human colony at Kepler's Landing." Another pause, shorter. "Kepler's Landing had a school." He sat back down. The chamber was very quiet for a moment. Several delegates exchanged looks. The Vrethkai ambassador began to compose a response about the regrettable but necessary nature of strategic leverage and the importance of resolving the mineral belt dispute through mature dialogue. Aldrich Chen had already stopped listening. The shipyards above Earth had been building freight haulers for decades. Big, slow, useful ships. Cargo holds the size of city blocks. Engines built for distance and economy, not speed. The kind of ships that moved grain and medicine and building materials to the 112 human colonies scattered across that arm of the galaxy. 3 days after Kepler's landing, the yards went quiet for 6 hours. Then they started again. Different orders. New templates loaded into the fabrication systems. The workers came in for their shifts and found the schematics changed, and they read the new schematics, and they went to work without being asked twice. Some of them had family on frontier colonies. Some of them had children. Most of them had both. They worked faster than the shift supervisors had ever recorded. A Vel Sudai intelligence ship, sitting at the edge of the system, watched the energy output of the yards double, then triple. The officer on watch filed a report. His summary was 3 lines. Human military mobilization detected. Scale is beyond current models. They have issued no demands and no ultimatum. His superior read the report twice, then asked the question that seemed obvious. What do they want? The officer wrote back, unknown. They have not said. The superior stared at that answer for a long time. Kale Morrow was rescued on the 2nd day by a patrol ship running the frontier route. They gave him water and a blanket and a seat, and they left him alone, which was the right thing to do. He sat in the seat and looked at the wall of the ship, and his mind kept going back to the settlement in the order he had walked through it. The community hall, the med station, the market, the path, the boot. He stopped that thought before it went further. He had learned a long time ago that some doors you do not open if you want to keep functioning. He was good at not opening them. He had practice. At the base, they put him in a debrief room and asked him questions for 11 hours. He answered all of them. He was thorough. He did not skip anything because the record mattered. The record was the only thing he could give those people now, and he was going to give it fully. Somewhere around hour 4, he noticed that the panel on the lower left wall of the debrief room had a loose casing. The second screw was not properly seated. It made a faint rattle when the ventilation system cycled. Nobody else seemed to notice. He took a small tool from his pocket and fixed it between questions. The interviewer did not comment. She just waited and then asked the next question when he was done. Around hour 9, the door opened, and a woman walked in and sat down at the far end of the table without introducing herself. She was in her 50s. She had the kind of face that had made a lot of decisions and was currently making another one. She listened. She did not take notes. She did not need to. When the interview ended, she stayed in her seat. The interviewer packed up and left. The woman looked at Kale. "How many children?" she asked. Her voice was level. No rise at the end. Not quite a question. A request for data. He told her the number. She nodded once. She stood. She left. He sat alone in the debrief room for a while. The ventilation cycled. The panel he had fixed stayed silent. He found out later who she was. The Defense Council meeting lasted 4 hours. Voss ran it. She stood at the front and walked through the situation the way a person explains something they have already fully understood and are now explaining for the benefit of others. She used no dramatic language. She presented numbers, ships, logistics, timelines, projected costs. She answered questions plainly. Near the end, one of the council members asked her what the objective was. What outcome were they seeking? What the end state looked like? She looked at him. "We are going to make sure," she said, that no species in this galaxy ever again looks at a map of human space, finds a colony, and calculates whether our children are useful to them. The council member nodded slowly. And how do we do that? We go there, she said. We remove the ability. Completely. And if they surrender? She looked at the table, then back at him. She did not answer that question. She moved to the next item on the agenda. The mobilization order went out at 0600 the following morning. At the bottom of the order, below the fleet assignments and the logistics chains and the chain of command structure, was a single line of text, the operations classification name, assigned by the automated command system when the order parameters were entered. Operation Absolution. Kale Morrow read the name when they handed him his assignment papers, because they had asked him to come along as a tactical observer, and he had said yes without hesitating. He looked at the word for a moment. He was not sure who they thought was going to be absolved. He tucked the papers into his jacket and went to find his bunk. He had a feeling he was not going to sleep much. Ambassador Theron of the Vel-Sudai had seen a lot of things in 30 years of diplomatic work. He had watched two species go to war over a naming dispute. He had sat in a room while a civilization surrendered itself peacefully because its son was dying and it had nowhere else to go. He had once negotiated a ceasefire between 3 different parties, while one of them was actively shelling the building he was sitting in. He thought he had seen the full range of what intelligent species could do to each other. He had positioned his ship at the edge of Vrethkai's space, specifically to stop what was coming. He had filed formal requests with the human government. He had spoken to Aldrich Chen, who had listened politely and said the human government appreciated the Vel-Sudai's concern. He had reached out to Admiral Voss's office and received no response at all. That was his job, and he believed in his job. He was looking at his navigation charts when the human fleet came out of faster-than-light travel. They materialized in sections. First the forward ships, then the middle fleet, then the rear. It took 9 minutes for all of them to fully arrive. Theron stood at his observation window and watched, and did not move, for all 9 minutes. He ran the count 3 times, because the first 2 times he thought he had made an error. He had not made an error. He opened a channel to Admiral Voss. She answered. Her face on the screen was calm. She looked like a person who had slept well and eaten breakfast, and was now doing ordinary work. Theron opened his mouth to begin with the standard diplomatic greeting, the formal language his training had made automatic, the words that created the proper frame for negotiation. She spoke first. Ambassador Theron, you have 20 minutes to move your vessel outside the engagement corridor. He found his voice. Admiral, I am here on behalf of the Galactic Council. I have a formal mandate to pursue ceasefire negotiations. The Vrethkai have indicated 19 minutes. Admiral, he leaned forward. He used the tone he had used 100 times, serious, measured, carrying the weight of institutional authority. I am asking you to give diplomacy a chance. What are your terms? Tell me what the human government needs in order to stand down this fleet, and I will take those terms too. She looked at him. We don't have any. He sat back. In 30 years he had never heard a military commander say that. There were always terms. Terms were the whole point. You built up force so that your terms would be taken seriously. The terms were the destination. Force was just the road. He understood, looking at her face, that he had the logic backwards. She was not building force to get terms. She had no terms, because terms were not what she was here for. Admiral, he said, and his voice was quieter now. Please. She looked at him for 1 more second. Her expression did not change. Move your ship, Ambassador. He moved his ship. Kale Morrow stood at the observation post on the flagship's upper deck and watched the Vrethkai defense fleet form up. They were good. He could see that. Disciplined formation, proper spacing, the kind of arrangement that said their commanders knew what they were doing. Under most circumstances, they would have been a serious problem. These were not most circumstances. He adjusted the strap on his observer's seat for the third time. The buckle was fine. He knew the buckle was fine. His hands needed something to do. The engagement started fast. He had expected that. What he had not expected, even knowing what he knew, even having seen the fleet materialize behind him, was the scale of it up close. Human ships moving in patterns he had studied in training, but never seen in practice. Clean, efficient, overwhelming. The Vrethkai defense line held for 11 minutes. Then it didn't. He watched them try to regroup. They were still trying to fight a proportional war, still operating as if this was the kind of engagement that ended with a negotiated pause and a prisoner exchange, and both sides licking their wounds. They had not updated their model. He adjusted the strap again. Let go. The Vrethkai fleet's main command ship broke hard to the left, and he tracked it for a moment, and then looked away, because tracking it meant thinking about the people on it, and he needed to not do that right now. He found a long scratch on the viewport frame instead, horizontal, about 15 centimeters, old, probably from a maintenance tool years ago. He looked at it. He traced it with his finger, without touching the glass. 15 centimeters, old scratch. He memorized the exact shape of it. It helped. The surrender signal came 40 minutes into the engagement. Cale heard the alert tone. He looked up from the viewport. Around him the tactical crew went still for just a moment. That particular kind of still that happens when something expected arrives, but still lands with weight. He looked at Admiral Voss. She was standing at the central tactical display. The surrender signal tone ran its full cycle and stopped, and the room was quiet. Her eyes moved across the display slowly. Her hands were behind her back. She reached out and touched the display, moved one fleet grouping icon, the third lateral wing, repositioned it to close off the far exit corridor of the Vrethkai formation. She did not respond to the surrender signal. The tactical officer at the comm station looked at her, waiting. She did not look back at him. She kept her eyes on the display. Cale understood then. He understood it the way you understand something that you don't have good words for. Not a thought exactly, more like a temperature change, a cold that started between his shoulder blades and moved down. She had heard it. She knew what it meant. She was not going to stop. The surrender signal ran a second cycle. She watched the fleet positions on the display. She moved another icon. Precise. Deliberate. The signal ran a third cycle. Nobody in the room spoke. Cale looked back at the scratch on the viewport. 15 centimeters, horizontal. He pressed one finger against the glass over it, not quite touching, held it there. The Vrethkai defense fleet stopped existing as an organized force shortly after that. Not all at once, in pieces, installation by installation, ship by ship, the way a building comes down when the supports are removed in the right order. Theron, watching from outside the corridor, filed a report to the Galactic Council. His report was 3 paragraphs long. For a man who usually wrote 12, that said everything. In the final paragraph he wrote, "I made contact with this human commanding officer prior to engagement. I do not believe the outcome of this campaign will be determined by military resistance. I believe it was determined before the fleet left Earth. I am not certain the Vrethkai understood what they set in motion. I am not certain I understood it either." He sent the report. Then he sat in his chair and looked out at the dark and the distant lights of a war that was really only a war in the technical sense. In every sense that mattered, it was something else entirely. He did not have a word for what it was. He was not sure a word existed yet. The Galactic Council chamber was full for the first time in 40 years. Every seat taken, every delegation present. Species that hadn't sent a representative to a session in decades had ships in orbit and delegates in the room. They sat and they looked at the reports on their screens, and they looked at each other, and they did the thing that intelligent species do when they witness something that doesn't fit their existing understanding of the world. They tried to find a category for it. The emergency session had been called by Ambassador Theron. He stood at the podium, and he looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. Not tired exactly, more like a man who had been carrying something heavy, long enough that the weight had started to show in his face. He presented his report. He had filed 6 formal ceasefire requests with the human government. 6. He walked the chamber through each one, the dates, the language used, the channels employed. He had always been thorough. He described the responses he had received. There were no responses, not one. 6 requests into silence. A delegate from the Grelthari species raised a hand. What is the current status of Vrethkai military infrastructure? Theron looked at his notes. He didn't really need to. He had read them enough times. There is no current Vrethkai military infrastructure, he said. The room was quiet. Their fleet is gone, their shipyards are gone, their fuel depots, communication arrays, command facilities, and weapons manufacturing sites are gone. He paused. The humans issued civilian evacuation warnings 3 days before targeting each populated area. They gave people time to leave. Nobody was targeting civilians. Then, what were they targeting? Everything else. The room processed that. A Grelthari general named Vosterin had been sitting in the back of the chamber, reviewing tactical reports on a private screen. He had spent 40 years studying warfare. He had written 3 books on military strategy. He looked up from his screen now, and he said something quietly to the delegate next to him. The delegate asked him to repeat it for the chamber. Vosterin looked up. His voice was flat. They are not destroying the Vrethkai, he said. They are removing the Vrethkai's ability to ever be a threat to anything, ever again. There is a difference. I am not sure the difference matters. Nobody had a good answer for that. The human delegation seat was empty. They had sent no one. 3 weeks into the campaign, Kale Morrow got a message on a back channel he didn't know anyone had. He was in a small monitoring room off the main tactical deck, running sensor logs from the previous day's operations. His hands were busy. They were always busy now. He had found a comm panel housing with a cracked corner 2 days ago, and he had been slowly, carefully working the crack back together with a bonding tool whenever he had a free moment. It wasn't a critical repair. Nobody had asked him to do it. The crack wasn't getting worse. He worked on it anyway. The channel opened without warning. Officer Morrow, the voice was careful, precise, Velsudai accent. My name is Ambassador Theron. I apologize for the unorthodox contact. I was not able to reach Admiral Voss. Kale set the bonding tool down slowly. Nobody reaches Admiral Voss unless she wants to be reached. Yes, I have learned that. A pause. I wanted to speak with someone who was there, at Kepler's Landing. Kale looked at the cracked panel housing. I'm listening. Theron spoke carefully. He was clearly a man who had thought about what he wanted to say, and was now saying it in the order he had planned. He talked about proportionality, about the difference between justice and destruction, about the Vrethkai civilians who had nothing to do with the order that was given, about how the architects of what happened at Kepler's Landing were already gone, dead or fled, and what remained now were just people, ordinary people, living in the ruins of a civilization being systematically taken apart. He paused at the end. Then he said, I am asking you to consider what those children at Kepler's Landing would want. If they could see this, if they could weigh in. Kale was quiet for a long moment. His hands moved back to the cracked panel. He ran his thumb along the edge of the repair. I knew those kids, he said. Most of them. There was a girl named Dara who used to bring me water when I was doing maintenance in the heat. Didn't ask, just showed up with a cup. She was 9. He stopped. There was a boy who wanted to know how every machine worked. Every single one. He would have driven me crazy if he wasn't so genuinely interested. Another stop. I knew them. Theron said nothing. He waited. I don't know what they'd want, Kale said. I really don't. I can't speak for them, and I'm not going to try. He pressed the panel edge gently. The repair was holding. What I can tell you is what this campaign is actually for. And it's not for them. It's not even really about the Vreth-Kai. Then what is it about? Kale looked at the wall. Right now, somewhere in this galaxy, there is a species with a star map and a territorial dispute, and an advisor telling them that humans won't go to war over one small colony, that our children are useful to them as leverage. He picked up the bonding tool again. After this, that advisor is wrong. That conversation doesn't happen, not in 10 years, not in 100, because this is the thing that gets remembered. Theron's voice was quieter now. And if you become the thing that the galaxy builds against instead, if the lesson they take is not, do not harm humans, but humans are the thing we must prepare to fight? Kale thought about that. He put the bonding tool down. That's why it ends, he said. Not now, but it ends. There's a line somewhere. I think Voss knows where it is. He wasn't entirely sure he believed that. He mostly believed it. I hope you're right, Theron said. The channel closed. Kale sat in the small room. The ventilation hummed. The repaired panel housing sat on the shelf next to him, clean and solid, the crack sealed to the point where you had to look for it to find it. He looked for it anyway. Found it. Ran his finger along the line. Still there. Just held together. On day 31, a name came up in the intelligence reports. High Executor Dravos. The one who had run the calculation. The one who had looked at a map and found a small blue dot and said the word that translated to optimal emotional collateral. He had removed his insignia. He was in a civilian convoy in the outer territories, moving with refugees, keeping his head down. The intelligence file had his location, his current identification, and a full record of his role in the Kepler's landing order. The file landed on Voss's desk at 1400 hours. She opened it. She read it slowly. She closed it. She sat for a moment. She looked at the photograph on the wall. 4 seconds. The same 4 seconds she always gave it. Then she forwarded the file to the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal with a single typed line below it. The line was, for prosecution under Article 9 of the Galactic Conduct Agreement. All evidence attached. She did not add anything else. No anger in the language, no weight, no satisfaction. Just a file and a direction, and the machinery of law given what it needed to run. She closed the window. She pulled up the tactical map. Day 47. The Vreth-Kai as a military civilization had stopped existing sometime around day 38. What remained after that was just the work of confirming it, checking the lists, making sure nothing had been missed. The kind of careful, methodical closing down that feels less like victory and more like turning off the lights in a building, room by room. Admiral Voss called her command staff together at 0900. There were 11 of them. They stood or sat around the tactical table in the flagship's main briefing room. They were all tired in the specific way that people get tired when they have been doing something hard for a long time and have not allowed themselves to stop and feel it yet. Their faces were professional. Their eyes were not. Voss stood at the head of the table. She said, "We have a decision to make." Nobody asked what decision. They all knew. They had known it was coming for several days. There is a point in any campaign where the stated objective has been achieved, and what remains is a choice about whether to go further. Every person in that room understood where the line was. They had been walking toward it for 47 days. She said, "I want every voice on record. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." She went around the table. She started on her left and moved right, and she asked each person in turn, not for a vote, for a position, for the reasoning behind the position. She listened to every answer fully before moving to the next person. Some of them said, "Go further." They said it without relish, without anger. They laid out the logical case. A species left with population but no military capacity could rebuild in 2 generations. 2 generations was not a long time in galactic history. The lesson needed to be permanent. Some of them said stop. They said the galaxy was watching, and what it was watching mattered. They said there was a version of this that crossed a line humanity had spent 300 years being careful not to cross. And that line existed for a reason. Nobody was wrong. That was the terrible part of it. Both positions came from the same place, from caring about the outcome, from thinking hard about what it meant. Voss listened to all of it without expression. She came to Kale last. He was the lowest-ranking person in the room. He was there as a witness, not a decision-maker. She had included him anyway. He had not questioned it. He had been holding a stylus during the entire meeting, running it back and forth along the edge of the tactical display panel in front of him. Not drawing, not writing, just moving it, back and forth, the same short track, over and over. When she looked at him, he stopped. He set the stylus down flat on the table. "We went far enough," he said. "Far enough that every species with a star chart and a grievance is going to think about this for 100 years before they make the calculation the Vreth-Kai made." He looked at the table. "That's what this was for, the lesson. And the lesson is already written. It's been written for 2 weeks." He looked up at her. "If we go further, the lesson changes. It stops being about what happens when you hurt human children. It becomes about what humans are. And then the galaxy doesn't think about how to avoid making us angry. They think about how to stop us before we get that way." He paused. "That's a different story. It doesn't end as well for anyone." The room was quiet. Voss looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the table. She said, "We stop here." She issued the withdrawal order at 0917. Ambassador Theron got the news at 0931. He was still at the border. Some part of him had believed, despite everything, that his presence might still matter somehow. That the physical fact of a diplomatic vessel sitting at the edge of the engagement zone meant the door to a different outcome was not fully closed. He was not sure if he had been right to stay, or simply unable to leave. He opened a channel to Voss. She answered. Same calm face, same steady eyes. She looked like the same person she had been 47 days ago, except that she was not the same person, and they both knew it. Nobody who did what she had done for 47 days came out the other side unchanged. They just carried it differently. He said, "The galaxy will remember this." She said, "I know." He said, "I don't think humanity fully understands what it has become in the eyes of every species watching." She looked at him. Something moved in her face, not quite an expression. "The shadow of one. We understand exactly what we are, Ambassador," she said. "We have always understood it. That is why we keep it on a leash." She let that sit for a moment. "We wanted every species in this galaxy to see the leash, to understand that it is real, and that it is ours, and that we choose when to use it." Her voice was the same quiet it had always been, not hard, not cold, just certain. "Today we showed them the leash is not decoration." Theron looked at her. He thought about everything he wanted to say. He was a man who was very good with words, who had spent 30 years using them carefully, who believed that the right words in the right order could prevent almost anything. He said, "I hope it works." She said, "So do I." The channel closed. He sat in his chair for a long time. Outside the observation window, the stars were the same stars they had always been. The universe had not changed its face. Only the understanding of what lived inside it had shifted. And shifts like that, he knew, did not shift back. He began writing his report to the Galactic Council. He had written hundreds of reports in his career. This one took him a long time, not because he didn't know what to say, because he knew exactly what to say, and the saying of it was heavy. He wrote, "The human action at Vrethkai space has concluded. Civilian populations are intact. Military and governmental infrastructure has been entirely removed. The architects of the Kepler's landing attack have been forwarded to the War Crimes Tribunal for prosecution." He paused. It is this ambassador's assessment that what the galactic community witnessed in the past 47 days was not an act of war, in any sense we have previously used that term. It was a demonstration, carefully bounded, deliberately executed. The humans chose where it ended. That choice may be the most important thing that happened. The species that can do what they did and then choose to stop on their own terms at a moment of their own selection is a species that understands its own power in a way that should be taken very seriously. He stopped there. He read it back. He sent it. Kale Morrow went back to Kepler's landing on a reconstruction transport 3 days after the fleet withdrew. He had volunteered. They hadn't been sure they should let him go. He had been very calm about it and very specific, and in the end, they had said yes. The settlement was quiet. The reconstruction team had started on the main structures first: water, power, shelter. The practical things. The bones of a place before the place could be a place again. He found the water reclamation unit on the east side of the colony, and he sat down next to it, and he opened his kit. It didn't need rebuilding. The structure was intact. It was in perfect working order. He started taking it apart anyway. His hands needed the work. They had always needed the work. The taking apart and the putting back together of things, the careful process of making something hold, the satisfaction of a seal that sits right, and a joint that doesn't move when it shouldn't. This was the thing that kept him connected to something he could not have named, but could not function without. He worked steadily for 2 hours. In the middle of the afternoon, he heard the sound of a concrete mixer starting up somewhere in the center of the settlement. He put down his tools, and he stood, and he walked to the edge of the east field, where he could see without being seen. The new school foundation, 6 workers moving around the frame, checking levels, guiding the pour, efficient and focused. They had the plans spread on a portable table, and they kept glancing at them, and then back at the work. He watched until the first section was poured and settling. He did not walk over. He did not want to be in that space yet. Maybe not for a long time. Some places you approach slowly, or you do not approach them at all, and you learn to be honest with yourself about which kind you are. He watched until they covered the pour and started on the next section. Then he walked back to the reclamation unit. He picked up his tools. He went back to work. The sun moved across the sky above Kepler's landing the way it always had. The grain fields were gone, but the soil was still there, dark and rich. In the distance, one of the reconstruction team members was singing something low and tuneless while they worked. The day was quiet. It was not the same quiet as before, but it was a quiet. And Kale Morrow, who had walked through the worst of it and was still walking, put one piece back with another, and held it until it was solid, and moved on to the next one. That was all. That was enough.